Hello.
Okay, so has the stream started in the live YouTube? Can anyone just confirm? Okay, so I'll just start the talk. Good evening, everyone. Um, we are here for a talk session under Hacktoberfest BIT Sindri, and this is the day two of that talk session. So, open source is changing the tech industry. Major big tech are also getting into the realm of FOSS, which is free and open source software. So is the case for developers. Contributing to open source opens a plethora of perspective and opportunities for fellow developers. Yesterday, we had a lightning session about Git and GitHub. Continuing further, today we have a talk on how did I started with open source by Simon Redman, and we also have our professor in charge, honorable professor in charge, Mr. Dinesh Prabhakar sir, who is also from Department of Information Technology. So, without wasting much time, I will just pass on the the initiating of talk to our professor in charge, Dinesh sir. So, Dinesh sir, on to you.
Hello, am I audible?
Okay, yes, sir, you are audible. Okay, Simon sir is also here. Good evening, Simon sir.
Hi,
Hi, good evening.
or good morning.
So, let me just tell Simon sir that Dinesh sir is our professor in charge, and he's from Department of Information Technology from our college. So he will just initiate the talk.
Okay,
Hello,
thanks.
hello.
Hi, I
Hi.
can hear you.
Good evening, Mr. Salman Redman. Uh, Here, this is Dinesh Prabhakar from BIT Sindri. I'm the professor in charge of this agency group. Those who are organizing along with you people this Hacktoberfest. Okay. So, from my side, we congratulate these students members, those who are organizing this event as a webinar uh, on open source softwares. So it is a good platform to give the guidelines to the participants so that they can use the open source platform for the open softwares, because nowadays we have number of open source platform to provide the facility where they can access the ready-made code sometimes, and without doing much with their own, they can get some help from the open source platforms also. So this helps in many ways to the developer or beginners as well as the expert also. So I think this event and particular this session of yours, Mr. Simon, it will affect positively in many ways to these participants. So I welcome you from the Department of Information Technology and CSC as well as entire BIT Sindri, especially from the HSC BIT group to this webinar session. So it is over to you. Please start with that your talk.
Okay,
Okay. I will just pass on to Anjani. We will just let you through Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us in this meeting and taking and for conducting the talk. We are also live streaming on YouTube. Let me just introduce our audience to Simon. He's a KDE developer and he's a maintainer in KDE Connect project. He works in Microsoft in SDE position, and yeah, let's start.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen? I don't know how this thing works.
Yeah, it is
Okay, it's visible.
visible.
Shailesh, just confirm that is it visible in the live stream?
Oh, I guess if it's visible on the meeting, then it should be visible on the live stream. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, then let me get started. So, yeah,
Okay,
as Ananji
sure.
said,
Thank you.
my name is Simon Redman, and I'm going to tell you today about how I got into KDE development. So I guess I should have put a slide, but KDE is, for anybody who doesn't know, one of the larger open source groups, and KDE works on a whole lot of projects. So the biggest one by far is KDE Plasma Desktop. So it's a desktop and window manager for Linux users that used to run on Windows. Somebody ported it to Windows. There's all kinds of other KDE projects though too. So there's an Office suite similar to LibreOffice or OpenOffice. You can do presentations and documents that way. There's a graphics editing program called Krita, which lots of people, like professionals, use. They think it's great comparison to Adobe Photoshop. But the project that I work on is KDE Connect, which tries to integrate your desktop with your phone so that you can share files between the phone and the desktop easily, and so that you can control your desktop from your phone, for instance, as a mouse pad. And the feature that I mostly work on is sending SMS from your desktop using using a little GUI app on the desktop, and then you can type in messages and they're sent via the phone. So a little bit about me is I've been with KDE Connect since about 2017. I started with a little bug fix, which I'll talk about later. And if you want, you could look at my blog, which it actually has an article about this because that was the first thing I ever wrote about on the blog. But unfortunately, I haven't really written anything in a while, just because I haven't had a whole lot to write about, really. And I always like to start with this map of the United States, especially for people who aren't as familiar with it. I grew up in the Southwest in New Mexico, and then I started moving a little bit northwest to Salt Lake City, Utah, which is where my mom grew up and where I attended college. And then I kept going northwest, as it turns out, and now I'm in Seattle working for Microsoft. I guess I already covered most of this. So I went to school at the University of Utah. Every summer that I was there, I went back home to intern at the Los Alamos National Lab. And I just want to say, since you all are students, I highly recommend doing some form of internship whenever you can, because then whenever you're trying to get a real job, people will be able to look at that and see that you have some experience, and that's always a positive thing. And now I work at Microsoft in Seattle, and I work for the Azure SQL DB import-export service. And this isn't relevant to the talk, but Azure SQL DB is Microsoft's cloud database offering, and the import-export service lets you get data in and out. So it's a fun little service. But now moving on to more about KDE. So this is essentially my path, and it doesn't have to be your path, but basically I found a bug one day while I was using KDE Connect. I submitted a fix for the bug, and that sort of got me in a little bit. And once I was in, I realized that there's more I wanted to do. And so I just kind of kept working after that and kept developing and kept hacking. And eventually, well, I'll get to it later, but eventually we have an SMS app that was pretty much all from me. And so again, yeah, this is my KDE story. It doesn't have yours, but I started with Linux back in the day. I had this laptop, and at the time I didn't have a lot of money. This was before I even went to college. I'm not even sure. I might have been in middle school at the time, so not even the last level of school. And so I didn't have a lot of money. I had this laptop, and it was running Windows Vista when I got it, but at some point, I mean, Windows Vista started becoming unstable, so I thought I would reinstall it. At which point I realized that I didn't have a valid license key for this laptop. Somebody had actually scraped the label off the bottom. So probably somebody had stolen the license key off of the laptop before selling it to me. So that's, I guess, what I get for buying a cheap laptop. But so at that point, I didn't have much of another option. I installed Linux on it. This was probably back in 2010 or 2011. And I installed Ubuntu for the first time and was able to do most everything. I was very pleased with it, except I couldn't play games. So I had to figure out some way to be able to run the games that use the anti-cheat software that expect you to be running in Windows. But anyway, I was just a regular Linux user for a long time. I didn't contribute anything for a very long time. And for those with a very long memory, you might remember that in about 2011, Ubuntu switched from using GNOME 2, which was very popular and which many people liked a lot, to using Unity, which was very unpopular, which some people liked a lot, but a lot of people really didn't like. There was no middle ground really on Unity. Either you really liked it or you really didn't like it. And I didn't like it, and so I said, okay, I'm going to go try something else. I tried to use Cinnamon Desktop, which is now very popular and useful, but back then was very beta and very unstable. I tried using Mate Desktop, which also at the time was very unstable and very new, and is now much better. And then I tried using KDE Plasma 4, which the current version is Plasma 5. Not that that's a very big deal, but it just impressed me with the number of features that it had, and compared to the other things I'd used, it wasn't new. It was very stable, and so it impressed me with being stable. And basically, I've used it since then. So when I installed KDE, I went and downloaded the Kubuntu installer, and that came pre-installed with KDE Connect. And one thing I should say, why KDE Connect matters so much to me is because I really hate dealing with my phone. I hate the interface. I hate the touchscreen. I use it because I have to, not because I want to. And so for KDE Connect to come up to me and say, well, you never have to use your phone anymore because I've integrated it with the desktop. You can browse your files directly from here. You can control some things directly from here. And so I thought that was great. And so I used it for a while, just again, as a regular user. I didn't contribute anything for a while. And at one point, they added a feature to reply to SMS. So if you got a message coming in, you could reply to it. And I thought that was great. If I got a message coming in, I wouldn't have to touch my phone. Except that this was just reply. So you couldn't ever send a new message. You could only reply, and you had to wait for somebody to message you. And so it wasn't ideal, but it was a cool feature. It answered a lot of my needs. However, I noticed at some point that once in a while when you were using it, you would send a message and then nothing would happen. It would just vanish. And I would go look on the phone and there'd be nothing. There was nothing in the logs. It was just gone. And so I thought a bug. And this is very important to me because I use this feature all the time. this is a bug I really want to have fixed. So if it's going to be fixed, it's going to have to be me, most likely. And so for me, it all started with a bug, and I had a little bit of experience with Android development. And so the first thing I did is I downloaded the KDE Connect Android repo, which was good because that's where the bugs happened to be. And I discovered that as you were sending a message, if the message was over a certain length, and that would be about 160 bytes, which is the length of one text message, I discovered that those kinds of messages would vanish. And so after digging a little bit deeper, there's a different Android API for sending a multi-part SMS message compared to an API for sending exactly one message. And if I were designing this API, maybe it would throw an error if you tried to send a message that was too long. But basically, the single SMS API, if you try to send a message through it, it just quietly fails. It doesn't do anything. It just accepts the request and then does nothing. So that's not ideal. But anyway, that's my experience with Android, is sometimes the APIs are not very ideal. And so I changed basically from calling that single send SMS API to the multi-part SMS. And so it's a much better API. I don't know why they even have the old one, because it will handle single messages, or it'll handle a longer message, breaking it up into smaller messages to send. And so that was my first commit to open source in general, to KDE Connect in particular. That was the first time I'd ever contributed anything to an open source project, and you can find it there on the website. I suppose I'll share these slides afterwards, but there's nothing much to see. And so after that first bug, like I mentioned at the start, I realized there's more I wanted to do, and once I was kind of in the project, it was much easier to, once I had interacted with the developers the first time, it was much easier to get help from them. And once I was in the project, I already had the source code set up. It was much easier to develop from my side. And so since that first bug, like I mentioned before, you could only reply to an incoming text message. So you couldn't contact somebody new if you missed the notification. So you had like a 10-second window to click the reply button, and after that, you were done again. You couldn't send. And so I thought that was a problem because, again, I don't want to touch my phone, and I send a lot of text messages. And so I wanted to be able to send a new text message to anybody I wanted, and I wanted to be able to look back at the history, because sometimes if you get just a reply to a text message, you might not remember what you said before that, and so you don't really know what the next person is saying. So I started looking at this thing called Telepathy, and specifically we have a plugin called Telepathy KDE Connect. Telepathy is this really cool, I don't even know what to call it. It's not quite an API. It's almost just a specification for how something should work, rather than any particular even lower level implementation. But basically, it's a way that you integrate with a chat program on the desktop. So you can have one chat program running on your desktop and lots of things integrated with it. So for instance, KDE Connect, but also you could have Google Messages integrated with it, and you can have Discord integrated with it, and you can have Slack integrated with it, and you can have, I don't even remember, but there's all kinds of integrations. And so Telepathy specifies both how the desktop client should work and how these other integrations should work. And we had this integration for KDE Connect, and it basically didn't work. And I started looking at it and realized that there were lots of problems with it. Mostly it was very hard to register the phone connection for the first time, and it could only handle one phone. That works for most people, I suppose. You still didn't have the history of the messages. It didn't have any contact information. So you had to type in a phone number that I guess you just knew off the top of your head. You had to type in the phone number, and then you could type in your message and you could send it to somebody, and it would work most of the time. Still very unreliable for some reason. I never really figured it out. But I was looking at that, and the first thing, of course, is maybe it needed contact information and it needed message history to come over from the phone. But as I started looking at this, as I started talking to the developers, it turns out that nobody uses Telepathy anymore, unfortunately, at least not in KDE. The Telepathy design is just, it's extremely cool, and it covers SMS messages, and it covers video conferencing, and it covers just audio calls, and it covers, I can't even remember what, and it covers a lot of things, and so it's too complicated. And so it's basically unused. Nobody develops for it very much anymore, which I think is sad because I thought it was very cool, especially because it would let me use a GUI that was already there rather than write my own GUI, which I don't like doing. GUI development is not my strong point. I guess it's good practice from that point of view. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to work on Telepathy KDE Connect anymore, but all the same things are still necessary. We still need to be able to pull over contacts, and we still need to be able to download message history. And so that's what I started with after my first bug. As I wrote basically this very insane, very bad content synchronization plugin. It was just this amazing jumble. It was unbelievably bad, honestly. And my lesson from that is design your software before you write your software. I basically had to throw this whole first version out and restart from scratch and rewrite a whole second version. And that whole second version is what we're using now. And so we now have this plugin for synchronizing contacts from the phone. And about the time I was starting on that second version, we had this sprint. This was what KDE calls a sprint in Barcelona, where KDE paid for me, and this was as I was a college student, so I didn't have a lot of money, so that was cool. KDE paid for me to go to Barcelona and work with the developers there for, I think we did 3 days the first time. And of course, we did a little looking around Barcelona as well, but it was mostly focused on, code the whole time we were there, just because it's you can do a lot of work over the internet, right? And you can talk to people over the internet, but when you're in different time zones, it's hard to get the right time to talk to people. And so getting everybody in one room, you have a whole lot more ability to communicate and work together. So that's the whole point of the KDE sprints, and we have them for a lot of projects. Of course, this year has been unfortunate. We've had to cancel them because nobody's allowed to travel. But in general, if I were to tell you one good thing about KDE, it's that if you're a recognized developer with KDE, we have these sprints, and they're very cool, and you get to meet all the developers, and you get a lot of work done, and it's a lot of fun. But anyway, so at the sprint, we finished the contacts plugin, we checked it in, and we said, okay, next thing, I guess we want a GUI app. And one of the very experienced guys on the team, Alish, started the GUI app and handed it off to me and said, here's a very rough GUI. I know you didn't know how to start it, but now I've started it for you. It has all the parts you might imagine that an SMS app should have, and get going, kind of thing. I don't have a picture of that first version, unfortunately, but it was very basic, and there was still no message history. It was just he had placeholder like A for all the messages that were from the other person. But it could send at least, because we already had that, so you could now at least send a message to a new person. You could click on their contact card and send a message. And so we actually released the SMS app as the 1.0 release about a year later. It's a little bit longer than a year, but close enough. And that was this past summer, not 2020, but 2019 summer. And it has all the contacts. I filtered it in this view, but you can see it had one of my contacts there, my test number, which is my Google Voice number. You can click on the contact, and then it brings up all of the message history, and then you can type a new message. And it doesn't support some things, so this was a picture message, and that came over, and the app just says, oh, well, I don't support that. You can go look at your phone to see what the picture was. But at least it, at least tells you that there's something there. Yeah, and so that was a very good moment for me to release that. Of course, then we realized there were tons of bugs with it, and it doesn't work for some users, and well, but at least it, it works for some people, and we fixed some of the bugs, and that works for most people. And so since then, so 2019 summer, I was on my last vacation before starting work, and so I started work at the end of the summer 2019. And so unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time for KDE since I started working. It turns out having a real job is a lot more work than I thought it would be. But the good news is, even though I haven't had a lot of time to do development work, there's still, I've been doing a lot of mentoring with KDE, which I found very rewarding. So the last couple of years, we've done Google Summer of Code, and I've been one of the head mentors for that for KDE Connect. And so for anybody who may not know, Google Summer of Code is Google pays students who are about your age, students in college, to work on an open source project. So they pay a stipend. It's not an amazing amount of money, but I'm sorry, my headset thought I was too quiet, and so it shut off. There was no sound coming in, so it thought I was talking to myself. Google Summer of Code, Google pays students to work on open source projects, and a student will propose something, and the mentors will say, okay, that's a good idea. Let me help you refine it. And then eventually there's a competition, of course, because there's never enough mentors. And so then the best students get picked. And unfortunately, so Naji was one of our applicants last year. And we had very few slots last year. So there was only one slot, and we had a bunch of really good students. And so we were only able to take one, and we weren't able to take a Naji. But I hope you apply again, Anaji, next year, because we'll have more slots, I hope. Mentoring, another thing was Google Codin, GCI, which you may not have heard of because it's for younger students, like students age, I think 7 through 15 or something. And that was interesting because it's much shorter. It's not a whole big project. It was, we proposed the idea, the developers proposed the idea, and here's like one little bug we think you might be able to help to fix, or here's one little feature we want you to add. And it was kind of fun. It was interesting to see that these younger students could actually get a lot of work done. But unfortunately, Google canceled it after that. We tried it. I think they tried it for they actually do it over the winter, 2 winters. And they said, this doesn't work very well. We're not doing it anymore, which is sad, but it will. And of course, aside from those big organized things, there are lots of times we get a newcomer come into the channel and say, hi, I want to help. I want to start on KDE Connect. How do I start? And that's always fun. They unfortunately, these people usually don't stick around. Very rarely do they actually develop anything, but I hope they have fun while they're trying. And so that's kind of my whole journey in KDE, but what might your journey be? I don't know. If you're interested in open source development, my suggestions would be find a project you personally care about. You could work on KDE Connect, you've heard all about it, but if you don't care about it, you're never going to be able to stay motivated. And since this is your free time, you're not being paid, you're not, this is in addition to your schoolwork or addition to your regular job, you better enjoy it, because this is your free time. If you're spending your free time doing something you hate, that's a terrible way to spend your free time. So find a project you care about. So that might be KDE Connect, it might be something totally outside of KDE. And then my recommendation is find a bug which impacts you. And the reason for that is bugs are just, I think, a little easier to get started with than features. You could propose a small feature, but if you don't know the code base very well, you're going to have trouble designing such a feature. The developers are not going to take you as seriously because they don't know you. But if you find a bug, it's fairly easy to debug a bug in random software, and that will give you a good idea of how the software is laid out and how it's designed, and so you can learn from that. And then maybe next time you do a feature like I did. And so after you find a project you love, I would say don't go right to developers and ask for help just because you won't know what questions to ask, basically. I would say go read the documentation if there is any, and sometimes there isn't, in which case you might need to go ask for help right away. But then you can clone the source code by yourself. It's usually on GitHub. You can clone it and look at it, and then build it yourself, of course, ideally. And then, like I was suggesting, is if you have a bug, you can start working through it by yourself. which will give you a good idea of what's going on. And like I said, a lot of people come into our Telegram channel and ask for just, how do I get started? And I tell them these things. You know, you can please go, here's our documentation, please go clone the source code and try to build it. That's always the first thing as I tell them, because if somebody isn't able to build the source code, they're not going to be able to contribute very much. And of course, I'm happy to help, but if it's somebody who's brand new and not able to help themselves, I won't have enough time to help them, even if I want to. So with that, I guess that's the end of my presentation. That's the last slide. I'd be happy to open this up for a broader conversation and listen to your questions. I hope that the meeting is still working. Yeah.
Okay, yes. Thank you for a great presentation, by the way. And we do have questions from our viewers. So let me.
Okay.
You would like to read in the chat, or shall I just read for you?
I think you can just read it. That would be fine.
Okay. So the first question is, what led you to contribute to KDE? I mean, we use a lot of open source applications daily and may find a bug.
Yeah. So in this case, it was a bug that was pretty heavily impacting me, because it was any message that was longer than 160 characters, which, if you've ever counted anything you've said, almost everything is going to be longer than 160 characters. So it was impacting me a lot. Every other message, it would seem like I would try to send, it would just vanish. And so it was a bug that hurt me very specifically, and enough that I took action on it, you know.
Okay, that's a very nice response. By the way, I'm a KDE Connect user from around 3 to 4 months, and I'm absolutely
Oh, cool.
loving that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I like it a lot.
I would also like to thank the developers who are working in the backside to like fix daily bugs and all those. Okay, let me move to another question. So Shivaman is asking, we are anxious. Apart from KDE, what are some of the project that excites you?
So that's well, that question is a great question, but it has a sad answer, which is I don't really work on anything else. I work on KDE Connect. I've done some work on some of the lower level libraries in KDE as they work for KDE Connect. So I've added features to libraries to support KDE Connect. But other than that, I don't do a whole lot of open source work, especially just because I don't have time right now.
Okay, but apart from the development, like what applications you really enjoy working on, or like you really enjoy using that application, any open source application?
Oh. It's hard to say if I enjoy something that's good, because you'd have to have something bad to compare to, and I don't use a lot of bad software. I mean, I use, for instance, Firefox on the desktop, which is, a lot of people don't know, but Firefox is fully open source, and that one's always fun. I like their plugins especially, and the various features that users have said, this is important enough to me to add this feature, you know.
Oh, cool! Like we are also a Firefox fan, and personally,
Yeah.
I use Firefox from 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So let me jump back to the next question. Another question is, how can we be sure that yes, this project will be selected in Google Summer of Code? Like as you said,
So
there are less slots.
yeah, so unfortunately, there's no way to ever be sure. And I guess I'm not sure, is this question asking, given that you propose an idea, how can you be sure that that idea is a good idea, versus once you have an idea, you make a proposal for it? Which part is that question asking, or is it both?
Um, we can jump back. We can jump to both the questions, I guess,
Okay,
because
yeah,
the
fair enough. So there's actually, so talking about proposing an idea first, the first thing to say is that we usually publish a list of things, of starter ideas, so to say. They're not necessarily fully finished ideas, but I publish a list of, oh, here's some things you can think about and start with. So, for instance, last year, one of the ideas was add MMS support to the SMS app. And another idea was copy paste, improve the copy paste between the desktop and the phone. So as it currently stands, right, you might, when you're just using your desktop, you might be able to copy a picture and then paste it into a photo editing app or paste it into something else. But then when you're doing KDE Connect, it becomes very slow. And if you want to send, like, you take a screenshot and you want to send it via SMS, assuming you don't have the SMS app, which it can't do this currently, but you have to save the screenshot to your disk, and then you have to share the file to KDE Connect, and then you have to go into your phone and you have to click on the messaging app and you have to click on the share file thing. Anyway, so improve the clipboard synchronization part of KDE Connect. So these are some ideas that I would have proposed. I'm getting away from the question. And if you go with one of these ideas, obviously it's a pretty safe idea because I've proposed it. But the thing that I really love is when students come and propose their own like idea, because it shows that they love the project and they've really been thinking about the project by themselves. So last year we had a student who proposed this cool idea, which was use your phone as a gamepad input, like an Xbox controller input for games. And he said, yeah, I'm going to go into the desktop side, I'm going to add a virtual device, and I'm going to go onto the phone side, and I'm going to let you lay out your buttons and your little control sticks like you might want on your phone. And I thought that was really cool. It's enough of a project to be a GSoC project. It's hard enough, in my opinion, enough work. And it just really showed that he really cared about the project. And so he was, again, unfortunately not picked because we only had one slot. But it was, I'm probably going to be putting this idea on my list next year. I'll ask the student for permission first, of course, but I thought it was a really cool idea. And so from that point of view, basically, as you're proposing an idea, take it to the developers early and say, what do you think of this idea? And ask for feedback. And then when you're doing the actual proposal, basically it's the same thing. I don't have as much to say about that. But you write a document that proposes your idea to us and says, here's the work you're going to do. And take that to the developers early and ask for feedback early. The developers don't have a lot of time, but if you give them enough warning, they'll be able to give you the feedback that you need, basically. So I guess that's my short answer. That the short version of my really long answer is take it early. Take it early and ask for feedback.
Okay, so that was a really nice answer. So I'll just jump to the another question. KDE Connect is a really huge project. How to start for beginners to understand the code?
So there's two things. The first thing, and I just recommend this for any project, is usually you can look at the thing that you're using. It might be a GUI app or it might be a REST API or whatever, and it'll have some words in it, some strings. And so if you take those words and you search them in the project, you will very frequently find the piece of code that you're looking for. So that's my first recommendation. This applies to any project. The way that I first start navigating any project is I look for, I just literally Control F and search the project for these strings, or I go on a GitHub and search using the GitHub search or whatever. And for KDE Connect in particular, if you're asking like how would I start navigating KDE Connect, there's I started by looking at the first level of the code hierarchy, like the folders that we have in the code repository. And I noticed there was this plugins folder. And therefore I thought, okay, at some point, these plugins must receive messages. And messages in this case being like a network packet. And so I went and dug a little bit deeper and found that part. And then I put a breakpoint on that part. And then I waited for the packet that I cared about to come past, because I would then, of course, send a message that was too long. And then I followed it through line by line, method call by method call, finding where it went from that first network packet. So in general, string search, and in particular in KDE, there are these network packets that you can follow fairly easily because they're very easy to identify and look at and say, yes, that's the one I want.
Okay. So shall I jump back? Shall I jump to another question?
Yeah, that's the end of my
I
answer.
think we're getting a lot of questions here. So the next question is, what are some of the tech stack that you work with regularly?
So KDE is interesting because we have a large emphasis on libraries. To quote one of the guys who's been around long code, to put everything in a library. So KDE, most of the desktop code is in C++, and that's kind of standard C++, the latest version, maybe -1, so like C++ 12. And then we use the Qt libraries, so Qt heavily. That's what KDE is founded on, basically. Using the Qt libraries, which is this cool cross-platform C++ library that lets you do. It actually handles the clipboard synchronization on the desktop for us. It handles, let's see, I don't know, but basically everything at the low level, all the system calls that we want to do, we always go through Qt at some level, at some point. And so Qt gives us a good framework for being cross-platform. So Qt is supposed to work on Windows just as well as it works on Linux, and just as well as it works on Mac OS. And it's supposed to work on Android. That part is a little less solid, but and so then on top of Qt, there's a lot of KDE libraries, so we call them KDE frameworks, and there are different levels of frameworks, but we'll just talk about them as one for now. And so this is the part that we've basically extended Qt in a lot of ways. So we added a bunch of GUI components, for instance, and we've added some more system call libraries. And we've added, so there's this whole framework within KDE frameworks for dealing with contacts. And so that's what I use in KDE Connect for dealing with the contact cards. And then at that point, basically, yeah, we're on top and we get to KDE Connect. And then looking at the Android side of KDE Connect, it's just a fairly regular Android app, so there's not a lot to say there. We just use the standard Android APIs, and we've written it's honestly a very boring Android project from that point of view. The source code kind of mirrors the KDE, the desktop project. So from that point of view, we've done something a little strange, but otherwise it's basically just an Android project. So that's for open source. For work at Microsoft, we mostly use C# code because Microsoft wrote C# and they love C#, and it's actually very good. I like it a lot. And since I work on the SQL Server engine, I won't tell you too much about it because, of course, it's protected information. But I will say that SQL Server has been around since 30 years, I think. I don't even know, but it's very old, and so there's a lot of sort of library code within the SQL Server project itself. But it basically is its own thing. It's like raw C++ and then SQL Server. Anyway, yep, that's the end of my answer.
Okay. So how can I also stay motivated to contribute in open source projects?
Yeah. And so I got a little bit of that in my presentation, but basically my suggestion is you have to find something that you really care about. If it's a project that you use every day and you look at the feature and you use the feature every day, you'll find bugs in it. So then you'll be motivated to fix them because they're impacting you. But also you'll get the sort of happiness of using the stuff that you made, and you'll get the reward of spending the engineering effort to make these things. So that's my recommendation. Basically, is it just has to be something you really care about. And I've tried, talking myself into, oh, you have to set aside an hour every week to work on something, or you have to whatever, do something. But for me, the only time I ever work on something is when it's something I really care about, and usually nowadays it's because I found a bug and I really need to fix the bug.
Okay. So, does KDE provide internships apart from GSoC?
So for the most part, no. And there's one exception that I know of, and there may be more, but this is the only one I know of, which is there's a guy named Bode who runs the Krita project. He's the head maintainer of the Krita project. And he's retired, he's older, he's he's not working anymore. And what he does is he collects donations for the Krita project specifically. So normally if you click the donate button on any KDE app, or you go to kde.org to donate, it goes into this generic bucket of KDE money. But Krita specifically keeps its own money, and he pays essentially students out of these donations that Krita receives. And Krita I mentioned earlier, but Krita is it's a photo editing, image editing app that is very similar to not PowerPoint, very similar to Adobe Photoshop. And it has enough big users, enough dedicated users that he actually gets enough money. He usually has like 3 interns going at any time. So he's able to pay like 3 students, which is very fun. But no, in general,
Yes,
there's no internships.
the folks from our design group use Krita for their design purpose. That's a really good application. And the question, my concern regarding this is, can a season of KDE be regarded as internships?
Oh yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. So for me, I guess it depends on how you define the word internship. I define the word internship as being paid. You're a student, you're not finished with your degree, you're being paid for a short amount of time, mostly to learn. The company is giving you money to feed yourself and to buy a few toys, but mostly the purpose of this is for you to learn. But yeah, you're right. SOK, the Summer of KDE, is also, we intend it as a very similar thing to GSoC, just that we can't afford to pay people. And the project's therefore smaller. And the idea is we guide students that way if we think you're not ready to do a larger, full-time GSoC project, but we want to invest in you and we're willing to put time into helping you. So that's what Summer of KDE is for.
It goes around 14 days, as far as I know.
I thought it was a month. I thought it was a month or 2 months, but yeah, it's not especially long. The projects are very small. For instance, last year there was a student who built our little KDE Connect.kde.org website, and he had a little bit of web development experience already coming in, so he had a good foundation to start building that website. And it's a nice website. It looks nice. Don't get me wrong. I like it a lot. It's just not it's not a huge project, right? It's just a small website.
Okay. Around 2 to 3 months, I have also started contributing in KDE Web. Like, I really like being mentored by Carl Schwan.
Carl's really good. Yeah.
Yes, he's really a good mentor, and he helps beginners really well. Okay, so we do have a question apart from open source, so I would go for it. When did you start competitive programming, and how did it go for you?
So I did a little bit of competitive programming in the university, and basically I started that because I had a friend who was running the club, and he said, "Oh, you should come do this," and I was like, "Okay." And so I went and I joined their. They would take questions off of Catus, which I'm sure you know, and they would they would make their own little, I don't even know what to call it, but competition for every week that they met, and they put a couple of questions in there, and then they would all sit down very quietly and work, and that's just not that wasn't what I was looking for. I sort of realized after the first or second time I went there, I wanted the cookies and conversation coding club, not the super competitive coding club. But So I did that for a little while, and then one of the professors at the university came to me and said, "We're doing this team to go to this competition, and we have one more spot. Do you want to be on it?" I was like, "Okay." We went there with my little team, and these were people I hadn't actually met before. They weren't people from the coding club, and so we were all a little bit inexperienced, and we got demolished. I mean, I think we answered 2 questions out of 15, and we were last place. It was great. That was like, I mean, we got totally destroyed. So that was and I smile because it was fun. It was a good experience still, even though we got totally destroyed. And the other thing is the same professor, I took a class with him, and he ran his class kind of in a competitive programming style, which I liked. All the coursework assignments, he put them in Caddis and said, I've put the correct answers in here. Go exercise this algorithm that I've taught you. And if you get the algorithm right, the program will run fast enough that you'll get full credit on the assignment, And so I thought that was really cool. And so those are my experiences with competitive programming. And I guess the answer to how did it go for me, it didn't go very well. It didn't go very well at all. But it was a lot of fun.
Okay.
So I enjoyed it, even though it didn't go very well.
Okay. I think competitive programming is something important for coding interviews, right?
Yeah, especially the parts where it focuses on having to choose the right algorithm. I was a TA, so teaching assistant at the university for several years, for I think 4 or 5 years even. I did it a lot. And I really enjoyed seeing the things that students would come up with these. I mean, because of course I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, these very inexperienced students, because I was teaching at a fairly low level, because I was myself a fairly low level. But you would have an assignment where I looked at it and I thought, oh, this obviously needs some kind of hash map or hash set. And I would have plenty of students, though, who would come to me and give me an array list or give me a linked list. And it was just fun to see, the students who used a hash set would go, their assignments would run in a minute. And the students who didn't would time out after half an hour. So the data structures part of that is always very important.
Okay. So we have a question. What are the present issues in KDE that you find interesting?
So I promised at one point I would fix this bug that I haven't ever looked back at. This was almost 2 years ago that I promised, and so I need to still do this. KDE aims to be very cross-platform. So we're supposed to, the idea is that all the software will run on Linux. It'll also run on BSDs. It'll also run on macOS. It'll also run on Windows, and in theory, also run on Android. But the UIs are usually terrible, so we don't spend too much time worrying about that. But so there's this KDE app called KDevelop, which is it's an IDE. And 2 summers ago, my GSoC student was working on porting KDE Connect to Windows. And I was trying to help him find a debugger for Windows, because as a Microsoft employee, I now know that debugging on Windows is very hard, and it's very much easier to debug on Linux. But even working in Microsoft and in this, developer group in Microsoft, this well-funded developer group who has a lot of tools, debugging software on Windows is honestly still a little bit challenging compared to debugging software on Linux. And so I was trying to help my student find a debugger that would work for him on Windows for debugging KDE Connect. And I tried installing Microsoft Visual Studio, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to load the debug symbols, so it was effectively useless as a debugger. And then I thought, okay, well, this is all using the KDE framework, so maybe the KDevelop officially supports Windows, maybe it'll work for Windows. And I go and try to launch it, and it doesn't launch for me. And the reason I eventually discover is because it's using the wrong version of Visual Studio. So this goes back a step, but the way you get the developer tools like the compiler for Windows is you have to install Visual Studio, and then KDevelop has to use those, and so it has to be able to detect your versions that are installed, and it was messing up on detecting the versions. And so I did a little research at the time. I found the correct answer, but I never implemented the correct answer. So that, for instance, is another present issue in KDE that I need to work on, that I promised to work on. There's plenty of bugs in KDE Connect too. So for one thing, in the current version, if you click on a conversation, it can take many minutes to load. It's quite painful. And this is just because every time you click on a conversation, it loads everything. It loads the first message through the first message you ever sent through the most recent one. And that sucks, and it's so slow. And I wrote for this Android side, the patch, it'll let you filter by a window, so you can only go get a small number at a time, and then you can go get the next and the next and the next until you've got everything. But I never finished the desktop side of this to my satisfaction. And so at this point, I need to just check in the code that I have. It's never going to be perfect, but I've had this version that I've been running by myself and has a few bugs in it, and so that's something. I think I'll just check it in with the bugs at this point, but that's another issue that I need to work on.
Okay. We have a question, something related to GSoC again. So, is fixing bugs enough to get selected for GSoC, or you need to implement an additional feature? I think she is asking about the proposal.
Yeah, probably not. You would have to somehow collect like a very large number of bugs, because of course GSoC runs for 3 months, and we're expecting the student to work full time, 40 hours a week, and so if you multiply 40 hours a week by the number of weeks in 3 months, you come up with a lot of hours, and so that would be a lot of bug fixes. But so generally, you can mix things though. So if you have a couple of bugs and you think these are bugs that I really care about, I haven't had time to work on it, but as part of GSoC, I'll fix these 2 or 3 bugs. Also, here's a slightly smaller feature that I'm planning to implement. So mixing
Okay.
things together is perfectly good.
I think she is asking about getting selected for GSoC, like the early
Not
phase.
making a proposal. I'm confused. Yeah. Okay. In that case, the thing that I'm usually really looking for is involvement, and I put that in finger air quotes because how do you define that? But yeah, bug fixes are enough, provided you're doing the bug fixes in an involved way. So you're not just dumping code on me every week and saying, "Here you go, Simon. Here's your bug fixed. I'll be back next week with more bugs," because that's not very ingrained with the community, right? And what I'm looking for more is you log on to our Telegram group and you answer questions from other users, which shows that you understand the product fairly well, and you look at other bugs in the bug tracker, and maybe you were doing that already, but you bring up bugs and you bring them to us and say, "Hey, is this an important bug? Should I work on this? Has anybody been looking at this already?" Kind of thing. So really, and this is kind of a KDE, I can't answer for other open source organizations, but for KDE in general, what we're looking for in GSoC applicants is community involvement, because what we really want is for you to stick around after GSoC. We want longer time contributors. So for us, GSoC, and of course we're not tying you to anything. There's no obligation to stay. If you hate it at the end of your GSoC, then that's perfectly fine. Or if you want to move on somewhere else, that's perfectly fine. But what we're hoping for is longer term developers. And so what we're looking for is somebody who's already involved with the community, somebody who's taken the first steps and we're getting to know them already. They've maybe done a few bug fixes, but the important thing is that they did important bug fixes, I guess. They worked with us to identify the things that were actually important to the project, So it's kind of a long answer. And I guess the answer is just fixing bugs is not enough, but part of your community building part of GSoC should be fixing bugs for sure.
Okay. So we have a question from Abhishek. Can I get into tech giants like Microsoft if I only do development work?
Sorry, can you say the last bit again?
I'll just repeat the question. Can
Yeah.
I get into tech giants like Microsoft if I only do development work?
Oh, yes, I guess I'm confused by the question. Um, yeah, I mean, my daily work, well, actually, my daily work at this point is not very much coding at Microsoft. Since I mentioned I work on this smaller project, I end up doing a lot of paperwork for this smaller project, which it is what it is. I kind of enjoy it. I've I've barely been working there for a little more than a year, but at some level, I'm already kind of the team lead on this project. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people who, spend a lot more time writing code than I do. And I guess the real key part there is you do need to understand the whole product life cycle. So you start with the design, you write the code, but then you need to give it to customers, and you're going to get bugs, and you're going to have customer pain. You're going to need to respond to those customers, basically. So the customer support, we're not necessarily talking directly to customers on a daily basis, but everything we do at Microsoft is customer focused. And so, I mean, because Microsoft is a business, they need to make money. If we don't have any customers, we don't make any money. So there's a lot of development work, but there's also a lot of support work, so to say, bug fixes, as well as answering questions, basically.
Oh, I think he was asking about getting into those tech giants, like getting
Oh,
recruited into those tech giants.
I gotcha.
Is only development sufficient or something else is also required?
I guess I don't know. I don't have a very good answer to that. I mean, you can look up the interview process online, and I can say for my interview process, there were a lot of data structure type questions. A lot of, I mean, the sort of the expected kind of questions about, how would you solve this problem? Do it on a whiteboard for me. If you've done a lot of development work, you by just experience should have more knowledge of these topics. So I think that'll put you in a better position. In terms of other things, I don't really have much of a suggestion on that. Sorry.
Like, what was your recruitment story? Like, how did?
Um,
What was the
so
importance of your open source background in your recruitment?
so I put that prominently on my resume because it gives me something good to talk about. So I can, when I'm in the room with the recruiter, they're usually glancing at my resume maybe for the first time, and they can see, oh, you worked on this project. Tell me about it. And at this point, I'm very able to talk about KDE Connects and the other little things I've done, and give them a good story for, the work I've done in the past. And for a recruiter, having some kind of experience or work in the past is really good, because if you've been successful at something in the past, it's likely that you'll be successful in the future, right? And that's what they're trying to hire for, is they're trying to hire for people who are going to be successful. The other part of my recruitment story, though, and I don't know, this applies differently to everybody, but one of my good friends at the university had done an internship with Microsoft. And so I mentioned I did my internship elsewhere, but he had done an internship with Microsoft. He graduated a year before me, and I said to him, in 6 months, I'm going to ask you to put me in for a recommendation, and he did, and that was, I think, very important as well. It's hard to say what was the most important part, but generally working with a broad group of people. I mean, and I assume you on the call do, because you're involved in this hacking club, so you have a good group of friends who are relatively higher skilled than maybe your peers. Having a good network of people who you can say, oh, look, that guy got into Microsoft, or got into Google, or got into, I mean, even a small startup that you're interested in. I'll ask him to recommend me. And since you guys have worked together on this hacking club, you all hopefully hopefully I say, don't answer this question, but hopefully you all believe in each other, as you all have good skills to get the job done, and so you would all recommend each other. Don't answer that question, like I said. But
Okay.
yeah, so I think
Okay, we
the two
have
important parts are experience and knowing people.
Okay, we have another question that is similarly related to the recruitment. Competitive programming or project development, which one you will suggest for getting a good job in a tech giant?
Um, so I don't have much of a good answer for this because I can only draw on my experience, I guess, and my one friend's experience too. My friend who I mentioned, he actually didn't do much of either one. He just had very strong coursework, which he used to get himself the internship. And so he also had done, I said that he hadn't had much experience. That's not quite true. He had worked, I don't remember if he worked full time or if he only worked part time, but it's not that important. He worked for the library at the university doing like back end tech work for them. And he thinks that first job gave him a huge benefit for getting into his internship with Microsoft. So I think that would be my first thing, is do, I guess, tech work, but either open source work or paid work, but work on something and be sure that when you walk away from that you have a good story to tell, that you can say to a recruiter, oh yeah, I was working on this one little piece of the back end and it had all these bugs in it and I fixed all the bugs and now it works 10% faster and our users are complaining much less and blah, 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 whatever. Make sure that you can explain your successes. And then, so from my experience, I didn't do a lot of competitive programming, so I guess it's not important. But like I was talking about a little bit before, competitive programming, I think, gives you a really good handle on data structures and things to use. And that I'm trying to think. It doesn't itself guarantee success, I suppose. If I saw somebody with competitive programming on their resume, but it, I don't know, I guess choosing the right data structure is always important no matter what project you're working on or what product you're working on. So I would then, I would pair that maybe with a little bit of other experience and say, yeah, I worked on this project and I use these data structures for this reason, and explain that you actually understand why data structures are important and when you would use a particular one or algorithms. And just in general, there's often the interview questions are kind of competitive coding-esque. They're a little bit competitive coding shaped, the interview questions. So if you've done a lot of practice, effectively practice by doing these competitive programming challenges, then you'll have, good experience to do the interview questions.
Okay, I think this is our last question.
Yeah,
As
actually, I've just
if I'm
realized
not
I need to
wrong,
leave. So yes, last question.
yes. How to find open source bugs to fix?
So, any big project is going to have a bug tracker, and so you can go look at, KDE has a big bug tracker, and then they're filtered by product. So if you wanted to find a bug for a project, you could go look there. But again, from my suggestion that you should be motivated to work on it, I would say just use open source software, which I guess maybe you already do, so this isn't very helpful. But if you use open source software, you'll eventually hit a bug, or maybe even not a bug, but just something that you don't like and you think could be better. And then if it's important to you at that point, then go start digging into it, go figure it out. There's something very important, which it's hard to teach in school, but sometimes there are questions and nobody has the answer. It's, the developers don't have the answer to why this thing works this way, how to fix this bug. There's no There's no way to, I don't know. And as an engineer, it's your job to go come up with those answers for the first time, right? If there's some problem and nobody's worked on it before, you're the first one to solve it. That's engineering. So I don't know. I took a bit of a tangent there, but if you find a bug, it could be very hard to fix. Is all I'm saying. Ask for help, but also understand that there may be nobody who can help you. You may be the only one in the world who knows anything about this.
Okay. I think this was the end of the question and answer session, and we really thank you, Mr. Simon, for coming here and helping the students to to get you through your journey about open source and answering the questions related to open source. Like, we are organizing this Hacktoberfest for the second time in our university, and we are getting we are really getting people into getting started into open source and
That's cool.
development. And actually, in our club, we are really inspired by the development procedure of KDE. And myself, I've myself started contributing in KDE Web, and we have Anjani here who had contacted you for that. So
Mhm.
I'll just pass on to Anjani to conclude this.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Simon. That was really informative, and we're getting a lot of good responses in the YouTube stream.
Good. Yeah.
Uh,
Thanks very much for inviting me. It's
so
been my
yeah,
pleasure.
It's actually
yeah,
it's our pleasure
thank you very much.
to be a part of your talk. So I think this was really helpful. And what do you expect from us, like you-
Oh.
from a developer club like us?
I guess I kind of touched on it already, but work together on projects because there's no big problems in the world anymore that you can solve by yourself. So work together. I would highly recommend practicing designing software. Like, start first with a piece of paper and draw what you think it should look like. Write down some of the parts that you think it might need to have. Write down how you're going to test it. That's absolutely the most important thing I've learned in the past year working at Microsoft. You need to write down what you're going to test before you finish the project, because this will help guide your design essentially, and it'll also, when it comes time to test, you'll be able to know what to test. Um, Work together, test, design, and this kind of goes back to work together, but network. Remember who it was that you worked together with well, because in the future those people can help you get a job and get a good job. Not a bad job, but a good job.
Okay, so
I think we may expect a lot of new people in KD or KD Connect.
Yeah, that I always wonder. Sometimes there's an outreach that I don't know about, and we get a huge, a bunch of people join the Telegram group at once, and I think, oh, I wonder what happened. Was today just my lucky day, or did something happen? No, I love new people, so I'd be really happy if anybody wanted to join the Telegram group for KDE Connect. And unfortunately I don't have the link in front of me right now, but for KDE as a whole, we have a lot of Telegram groups. So go find a project you're interested in, go join the IRC channel, or go join the Telegram group and go introduce yourself to the developers. We try to be very open and welcoming to new people. So I always look forward to seeing new people in the Telegram group. Okay.
so we'll just conclude the session, and we wholeheartedly thank Mr. Simon to be a part of this initiative and contribute to our cause. Thank you.
Best of luck in all of your future.
Okay. All the best
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
for your future ahead. Thank you. Suresh, can you just stop the live stream? Shailesh, has the stream stopped? We would also like to tell our audience that we have a boot camp session on 11th about discussing about issues related to Linux and Linux installations. So stay tuned and do